Why non-cooperation? In his famous book, Hind Swaraj in 1909, Mahatma Gandhi declared that the British rule was established in India with the cooperation of Indians and had survived only because of this cooperation. If Indians refused to cooperate, British rule in India would collapse within a year and Swaraj would come. How could non-cooperation become a movement? Gandhiji proposed that the movement should unfold in stages. It should begin with the surrender of titles that the government awarded and a boycott of civil services, army, police, courts and legislative councils, schools and foreign goods. Then, in case the government used repression, a full civil disobedience campaign would be launched. Through the summer of 1920, Mahatma Gandhi and Shaukat Ali toured extensively, mobilizing popular support for the movement. Many within the Congress were, however, concerned about the proposals. They were reluctant to boycott the council elections scheduled for November 1920, and they feared that the movement might lead to popular violence. In the months between September and December, there was an intense tussle within the Congress. For a while, there seemed no meeting point between the supporters and the opponents of the movement. Finally, at the Congress session at Nagpur in December 1920, a compromise was worked out and the non-cooperation program was adopted. How did the movement unfold? Who participated in it? How did different social groups conceive of the idea of non-cooperation? The Non-Cooperation-Khilafat Movement began in January 1921. Various social groups participated in this movement, each with its own specific aspiration. All of them responded to the call of Swaraj, but the term meant different things to different people. The movement in the towns. The movement started with middle-class participation in the cities. Thousands of students left government-controlled schools and colleges. Headmasters and teachers resigned. And lawyers gave up their legal practices. The council elections were boycotted in most provinces, except Madras, where the Justice Party, the party of the non-Brahmins, felt that entering the council was one way of gaining some power, something that usually only Brahmins had access to. The effects of non-cooperation on the economic front were more dramatic. Foreign goods were boycotted, liquor shops picketed, and foreign cloth burned in huge bonfires. The import of foreign cloth halved between 1921 and 1922 its value dropping from rupees 102 crores to rupees 57 crores. In many places, merchants and traders refused to trade in foreign goods or finance foreign trade. As the boycott movement spread and people began discarding imported clothes and wearing only Indian ones, production of Indian textile mills and handlooms went up. But this movement in the cities gradually slowed down for a variety of reasons. Khadi cloth was often more expensive than mass-produced milk cloth, and poor people could not afford to buy it. How then could they boycott milk cloth for too long? Similarly, the boycott of British institutions posed a problem. For the movement to be successful, alternative Indian institutions had to be set up so that they could be used in place of the British ones. These were slow to come up, so students and teachers began trickling back to government schools, and lawyers joined back work in government courts. Rebellion in the Countryside, Part 1. From the cities, the non-cooperation movement spread to the countryside. It drew into its fold the struggles of peasants and tribals which were developing in different parts of India in the years after the war. In Awadh, peasants were led by Baba Ramchandra, a sannyasi who had earlier been to Fiji as an indentured laborer. The movement here was against talukdars and landlords who demanded from peasants exorbitantly high rents and a variety of other cesses. Peasants had to do begar and work at landlord's farm without any payment. As tenants, they had no security of tenure, being regularly evicted so that they could acquire no right over the leased land. The peasant movement demanded reduction of revenue, abolition of begar, and social boycott of oppressive landlords. In many places, Nai Dhobi Bands were organized by panchayats to deprive landlords of the services of even barbers and washermen. In June 1920, Jawaharlal Nehru began going around the villages in Awadh, talking to the villagers and trying to understand their grievances. By October, the Oudh Kisan Sabha was set up, headed by Jawaharlal Nehru, Baba Ramchandra, and a few others. Within a month, over 300 branches had been set up in the villages around the region. So, when the non-cooperation movement began the following year, the effort of the Congress was to integrate the Awadh peasant struggle into the wider struggle. Rebellion in the Countryside, Part 2. The peasant movement, however, developed in forms that the Congress leadership was unhappy with. As the movement spread in 1921, the houses of talukdars and merchants were attacked, bazaars were looted, and grain hoards were taken over. In In many places, local leaders told peasants that Gandhiji had declared that no taxes were to be paid and land was to be redistributed among the poor. The name of the Mahatma was being invoked to sanction all actions and aspirations. Tribal peasants interpreted the message of Mahatma Gandhi and the idea of Swaraj in yet another way. In the Gudem hills of Andhra Pradesh, for instance, a militant guerrilla movement spread in the early 1920s. Not a form of struggle that the Congress could approve. Here, as in other forest regions, the colonial government had closed large forest areas, preventing people from entering the forests to graze their cattle or to collect fuel wood and fruits. This enraged the hill people. Not only were their livelihoods affected, but they felt that their traditional rights were being denied. When the government began forcing them to contribute begar for road building, the hill people revolted. The person who came to lead them was an interesting figure. Alluri Sitaram Raju claimed that he had a variety of special powers. He could make correct astrological predictions and heal people. And he could survive even bullet shots. Captivated by Raju, the rebels proclaimed that he was an incarnation of God. Raju talked of the greatness of Mahatma Gandhi, said he was inspired by the Non-Cooperation Movement, and persuaded people to wear khadi and give up drinking. But at the same time, he asserted that India could be liberated only by the use of force, not non-violence. The Gudem rebels attacked police stations, attempted to kill British officials, and carried on guerrilla warfare for achieving Swaraj. Raju was captured and executed in 1924 and over time became a folk hero. Swaraj in the Plantations. Workers too had their own understanding of Mahatma Gandhi and the notion of Swaraj. For plantation workers in Assam, freedom meant the right to move freely in and out of the confined space in which they were enclosed. And it meant retaining a link with the village from which they had come. Under the Inland Emigration Act of 1859, plantation workers were not permitted to leave the tea gardens without permission, and in fact, they were rarely given such permission. When they heard of the Non-Cooperation Movement, thousands of workers defied the authorities, left the plantations, and headed home. They believed that Gandhi Raj was coming and everyone would be given land in their own villages. They, however, never reached their destination. Stranded on the way by a railway and steamer strike, they were caught by the police and brutally beaten up. The visions of these movements were not defined by the Congress program. They interpreted the term Swaraj in their own ways, imagining it to be a time when all suffering and all troubles would be over. Yet, when the tribals chanted Gandhiji's name and raised slogans demanding Swatantra Bharat, they were also emotionally relating to an all-India agitation. when they acted in the name of Mahatma Gandhi or linked their movement to that of the Congress, they were identifying with a movement which went beyond the limits of their immediate locality. Towards civil disobedience. In February 1922, Mahatma Gandhi decided to withdraw the non-cooperation movement. He felt the movement was turning violent in many places and satyagrahis needed to be properly trained before they would be ready for mass struggles. Within the Congress, some leaders were by now tired of mass struggles and wanted to participate in elections to the provincial councils that had been set up by the Government of India Act of 1919. They felt it was important to oppose British policies within the councils, argue for reform, and also demonstrate that these councils were not truly democratic. C.R. Das and Motilal Nehru formed the Swaraj party within the Congress to argue for a return to council politics. But younger leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose pressed for more radical mass agitation and for independence. In such a situation of internal debate and dissension, two factors again shaped Indian politics towards the late 1920s. The first was the effect of the worldwide economic depression. Agricultural prices began to fall from 1926 and collapsed after 1930. As the demand for agricultural goods fell and exports declined, peasants found it difficult to sell their harvests and pay their revenue. By 1930, the countryside was in turmoil. Against this background, the new Tory government in Britain constituted a statutory commission under Sir John Simon. Set up in response to the nationalist movement, the commission was to look into the functioning of the constitutional system in India and suggest changes. The problem was that the commission did not have a single Indian member. They were all British. When the Simon Commission arrived in India in 1928, it was greeted with the slogan, "Simon, go back." All parties, including the Congress and the Muslim League, participated in the demonstrations. In an effort to win them over, the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, announced in October 1929 a vague offer of dominion status for India in an unspecified future and a roundtable conference to discuss a future constitution. This did not satisfy the Congress leaders. The radicals within the Congress, led by Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose, became more assertive. The liberals and moderates who were proposing a constitutional system within the framework of British dominion gradually lost their influence. In December 1929, under the presidency of Jawaharlal Nehru, the Lahore Congress formalized the demand of Purna Swaraj, or full independence for India. It was declared that 26 January 1930 would be celebrated as the Independence Day, when people were to take a pledge to struggle for complete independence. But the celebrations attracted very little attention. So Mahatma Gandhi had to find a way to relate this abstract idea of freedom to more concrete issues of everyday life.